So apologies for the slightly strange camera angle here, but hopefully this will all make sense. Essentially, the players in my campaign are getting to the point where they're going to need to start spreading out and exploring other areas. And I created a continent back at the beginning of the campaign, which is called Zeonai, and yeah, there's some decent adventures going around there. But especially now that I'm running 2 games on the same continent, it's getting a little small, and I'm starting to feel some of the things that maybe I could have done better in designing of that continent. So what I'm going to do is just go through the process of creating a new continent and see where that takes me. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is figure out what kind of continent that I want to make. Based on the overall geography I have in my head, I want this continent to have a northwestern desert region, and then possibly that will blend down into a bit of a slightly lush, maybe even rainforesty sort of area. Basically, this would be something of the equivalent of sort of Central America, the hotter regions of North America, and then leading down towards the rainforest of South America. That's kind of what I'm thinking of here. But the first thing I need to do is figure out what's going to go on there, because at the moment I have a blank piece of paper with nothing on it. What I like to do is use dice just to get a bit of an understanding of the landscape and just sort of throw things around a little bit. So I need to figure out what I want to be in my world. So I'm just going to get out a few of my favourite dice sets here and maybe see how many of each thing I would like to have. So I think I always like to use D4s as mountains. That makes sense to me. They're kind of mountain shaped already. So I'm just going to make a little key here in the bottom of this map just for my own little reference. Okay, so my D4s are here, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's throw in another one. 7 mountains. That sounds about right. Okay, D20s I'm going to use for large cities. I've got 4 here. And yeah, I think that sounds about right. I want this to have a bit more of a wilderness feel than the continent that my players are currently working on. So we're going to have some D20s. I'll put those down the bottom here. So I guess that means then that the D12 is going to have to be smaller towns. I've only got 2 of those here, so let's grab out another other 12s that I've got in here. There's one, there's one. I'm actually going to take away one of these as well, because I don't want that many large cities. 3 large cities is fine. 4 medium towns. Next I'm going to look at D10s. I've got 3 ahead of me here. 4 in fact. I think I would like these to represent areas of particular interest, areas of particular danger, or interesting features. And when we come to expand the map in a little bit, we'll see what that could actually mean. I'd like to have this area with a large river flowing through it. So I think what I'm going to use is the D8. I'm going to use those as points that the river will touch, because I'm assuming a lot of these mountains are going to be the source of the river. I'm aiming for there to be, hopefully, a collection of mountains. These will be points that the river will flow through. So I'm going to put river point. And then lastly, that leaves me with these 2 D6s. So I'm just thinking about some of the geographical features that I already have and some that I've seen in other maps that I've seen. And I think I would like these actually to be a little different. I think I'm going to use these as lakes, because my first continent map, Zeonai, is very, it's very sort of simple island shape. There's a little bit of a cutout, a couple of rivers, but there's not really a lot of water traversal within it. So I'm actually going to grab another, let's say another, yeah, we'll make it 3 D6s, and they can be lakes. We'll go in reverse order. So what I've got a big A3 bit of paper here, and I'm just going to drop the D20s. That one went off, I'm just going to roll that one back on again. Okay, they're a little close together. I'm going to rethrow these ones, just so that it's kind of a bit random. Okay. Maybe a large city there. So they're kind of in a triangle with each other, almost. That kind of works with the idea I had in mind. Okay. Let's throw down some towns next. Cornwall originally, say where that goes. Okay, that's quite a good position. These two I don't like, we'll re-roll those. Okay. The miscellaneous interesting features. I'm just going to sort of let these fall and spread out. And we'll do these again, so over here somewhere. Okay. I like there being one down here. 3 in a row up there doesn't make sense. Let's re-roll these two. Yeah, okay, you've got a city next to an interesting feature, whatever that ends up being. We'll figure that out later. Getting interesting. Okay. Next, actually I'll save the d8 for the end because the mountains will inform where the river will go. We'll throw our d6s for lakes. I'm going to drop these one at a time. Now I know I want my northwestern region to be mostly desert, so I don't think I'm going to want much in the way of lake there. But let's just sort of go one maybe there, and then sort of, I'll drop that one. I'll drop that one sort of there. Okay. So just geographically then, we've already got some interesting things here. We have 2 lakes which surround this town. We've got a town and a city very close together. That city was actually a little further south at that point, wasn't it? Yeah, I think this is working out fairly well. Okay, next I'm going to throw my mountains down then. I kind of want to have a collection in a particular spot. So if this is going to be desert, it would kind of make sense for the mountains to maybe be over here or over here. So I'm just going to sort of pick the top right corner there, and I'm just going to go like that. Okay, that's shaken things up a little bit. So we've kind of got a mountain range almost. Looks like it's running through here. I'm just going to bring these a little closer together now. That would make a mountain range. I still have one in my hand that flew off the paper entirely. So with that, I'm going to go over here somewhere. Okay. So we've sort of, if I adjust these a little bit, we've sort of a bit of a crescent mountain range there. That is interesting. And lastly then we can plunk down these d8s again, just sort of semi-randomly see where they land. Okay, that actually kind of works. So we have a river which would flow probably past or even through this major city here and off towards the, oh, this would be the sea off the edge of the map here. Okay, that makes sense. Bring that in a little bit. Okay. Now we need to sketch around this a little bit. Now I kind of already have in my head an idea that this is going to be a very sort of open desert area. This actually will link into the very southern bit on the ZNI continent map that I've already created. So I kind of know roughly that that's going to sort of look like this. And then what I'm going to do is just sort of sketch loosely around these features here. I'll leave that one out on purpose because that might lead to something interesting. There's going to be a lake here. That's probably going to end up being like a cutout around towards that town. So let's bring the land around instead and just sort of loop it around like that. This is super rough. I am in no way an artist whatsoever. My pen and pencil skills are basically 0. So this is going to look super rough, but that's fine. We have a real rough continent shape there, so it's kind of, looks a bit like a shopping bag actually. There's a handle here, sort of flows off there. It's a bit square, it's a bit boring, but we'll cut into it later and we'll make it more interesting. This is just a real super rough, let's get something on a page. My mountain range is this sort of weird little crescent range, which I quite like. And there's these lakes and the town. So this lake is probably going to be actually filling the majority of the area around these mountains. This one continues here. Do I want to connect those or do I want to have them separate? Yeah, you know what? I'll connect that into one big central lake and probably extend this a little further. So the idea then being that there would be a desert which would sort of blend into then this section onwards being quite sort of heavily forested. So I'm just going to now start taking these away and replacing them with what they represent. Next, there's these interesting features. Now, this one I've left deliberately in the water. For the moment, I'm just going to give these a question mark symbol, because I'm not entirely sure what those are going to be yet. There will be something interesting and strange, maybe dangerous, maybe wondrous, maybe an old temple or a ruin or a fortress or location of a legendary dungeon or many, many things. The river points then. What am I going to do with this river? Because the river's kind of not making sense. Especially with this big lake. Kind of doesn't make sense that there would then be a river immediately next to the lake. I'm not too fussed about my geography being super realistic and super accurate, but I want it to at least feel like a place. So instead, do I want to remove the rivers and make them something else? Within the lore of my world, there are areas that are craters, areas that are still left over from a cataclysm that happened many, many years previously, but craters nonetheless. So we're going to repurpose these as craters. And I'll throw them like that. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. This lake has become a crater. Because actually that's landed right next to that lake token, and I'm going to stick with that. So this is a crater lake. So that would be a particularly large crater which has actually been filled in by wash from the sea here, presumably, with this really terribly drawn little jutting out of land there. There's also a crater here. So that's probably going to be having an effect on the geography of this region as well. It's not going to be filled with water like this one, so probably that land will come out a little bit just to make that make a bit more sense. So essentially we have the sea, the crater, the lake, with a town on the opposite side. This would be a good divide then between the desert region and the sort of rainforest region, because we've sort of got a line going right through the middle of the map. Okay, these are just lakes, so I can just sort of loosely... And then lastly my mountains. Now I've got quite an interesting little crescent shape of mountains here, and then one up here. So I think, yeah, I like that. So I'm just going to sort of... That makes sense. I'm definitely not a geography or geology expert, so I have no idea if this is strictly realistic, but it seems to make sense within the fiction at least. So that's all I'm really interested in at the moment. So now what we're left with is open areas, and that's good because I wanted there to be, I deliberately picked a small amount of cities and towns because I wanted there to be sort of foresting and things like that. This is likely to be some kind of island, which I'll get to in a bit. But this whole section here, I'll just sort of really loosely sketch around that. That's all then prime area for forest. Big forest, which is going to go basically up to the waterfront. This here too is very likely to be forest. Again, ignore my writing. Terrible. And then this is my desert. So, very rough outline of what the continent's going to be. There are no names. I have no idea what's going to happen in any of these places. I certainly have no characters or anything lined up. But that's okay, because then the next step is to take this onto the computer and do something a little fancier with it.
Okay, and with the basic sketching completed, it's time to take this into something that's going to make it a little prettier. So this is Inkarnate. This is the map-making website that I like to use. There are others available, but this is the one that I've had the best luck with and the most fun with. And people have used it to make just gorgeous maps. They've got all these incredible examples of things that people have created. I'm going to be using the Fantasy World preset for mine, so I can get a bit of a zoomed out view. With Inkarnate you can create battle maps, regional maps, which essentially works best for cities, that sort of thing. But today we're making a continent, so I'm going to stick with the world style. And I drew it in a landscape format, so let's stick to the digital landscape. We'll keep it in a 2K resolution, that seems fine. So I've created now a very simple, very basic and very, very blank continent map. And I've already uploaded as a custom stamp a photograph I took of the sketch that I just drew. Not going to be at the best quality, but that's fine. I don't really need it to be. all I need this for is just for a rough guide to what I'm actually going to be creating. So I'm going to pop this down in the bottom right corner as much as I can, because this is going to have to fit in with my existing idea of the desert being a little wider. And naturally, I suppose it will be the case that if you're doing this with a rectangular piece of paper, and I mean, show me a piece of paper that isn't rectangular, that you can buy in large sketchbook format, but your continent's going to end up looking a little boxy, so I'm going to deliberately be going outside the bounds of this to make this just a little more interesting. So what I'm going to do, having placed this image down, is I'm going to grab the mask tool, I'm going to set it to a bit of a lower brush size, and I'm just going to draw around the outside of this. Now, you won't actually see anything happening, and the reason for that is quite simply going to be that I'm drawing underneath this image, but it is going to be there. And I'm just going to loop around the outside of my lake areas as well, so I know they were supposed to be water. There we go, that's it, that's done. Continent map completed. No, obviously not, but it does provide a basis for me to work with. You can see the rough shape is there, so that can be deleted now, because now what I'm focusing on is the digital map itself. So I'm going to increase the brush size and just sort of fill in this area. So we're at a point now where I have my lakes in place and I have the real basic shape of the land that I laid out on paper. The next thing I want to do is I want to increase the size of this desert region, because my southern region is very much going to be forest, my northern region here is going to be mostly desert, and it just isn't big enough right now to make sense as a desert region. So this is going to be very much a large parched desert area, which eventually comes down, and essentially there are two ways around this enormous lake unless you want to cross it. So now I can start shaping the land a little bit. I think the best way to do this is generally to start with the geography and then fit in the, what you would call, I suppose, the human geography, the cities and towns, etc. afterwards. Okay, first things first, I think my central lake, it's interesting. I think it's a little small. I think I'd like it to be a little bigger, so with the subtract tool I can just remove a little from the land there. Next, I'm kind of not very happy with the sort of the shopping bag handle that I've got here on the eastern coast. So I'm just going to extend this out a little bit, but I don't want anything touching the edge of the map because I think that's going to look strange. We have almost a land bridge going around this lake, which remember is a crater lake. So I think actually maybe it would make sense to have that be connected to the sea. If that's a crater lake, you can assume that it's probably filled in by seawater at some point. So that kind of makes a bit of geographical sense. Okay, next then I'm going to look at a few stamps, and we can get rid of this because I want some mountains. A little big for what I'm looking for here, but I can pop one down, and Inkarnate will remember the size that you have plonked things at. So I had a sort of a crescent mountain range going around like this. So what I'll probably do is set that there, and then any future mountains that I place will remain at that size. I tend not to go for hyper-realism with my maps. They tend to be a little more representative geography rather than complete 100% accurate. I guess think more the kind of map that an actual explorer would draw rather than a super accurate, hyper-detailed video game map or something like that. The next big feature that I need is the crater. Okay, that kind of fits. I'm now thinking my geography in this corner is particularly boxy, so I'm going to bring this out a little bit. Have a little natural bay there, and then have it flow around. Yeah, that looks okay. That looks okay. next thing to do then is to pop down some of my towns and cities. Let's see. Okay, now this is going to be a representative map, but I still like to have at least interesting looking buildings on my map. So I have 3 large cities, and I'm going to use, for the time being, I'm going to use the same image for each one, just so I can keep track of them all. So this one I think is going to move down here and be a port city there. This one's actually fine, because that will probably spread up to cover some of that sea there as being the water that this city is attached to. And then lastly this one here, and that's going to be within one of the large rainforest areas, so I think that's very clearly going to have a river flowing right past it, so I'm not too bothered about that. I've now realised that maybe I'd like a little more land, so I can move this city along a little bit. So we're already deviating more and more from the original sketch that I drew. The sketch obviously being an incredibly basic idea, just to get some dice on a bit of paper and see what actually fits. Now we're starting to fill in a bit more detail. Okay, towns next. My desert feels like it's not particularly... I want it to be a little bigger and a little more impressive than it actually is at this point. So the desert, I think, just roughly, will basically stretch about as far as these mountains, with the mountains being the dividing line at which the more forested area starts to come in. We'll see how that works. Okay. My little mystery areas, well actually what I tend to like to do is just scroll through the Inkarnate stamps that I have available and see if anything pops up as being interesting. Yeah, a volcano. Now I don't have a volcano anywhere as yet in my world, but it would explain maybe why some of this area is a bit more deserty, and in fact around these mountains would be a great place for a volcano to sit. So let's pop that in there, and then maybe what I can do is move these mountains to actually surround the volcano. That seems to make a bit more sense. I mean, when it comes to sort of writing and world building and so on, I tend to let one element inform another and improvise back and forth. I had no intention of having a volcano on this continent, but now that there is one, that is going to inform some of what happens in this region. Kind of makes sense for a big hot area to have a volcano, so I'm gonna go with it. Okay, I've got another mystery symbol down in the bottom right, and I said originally that was probably going to be an island. Let's see if we've got any good ideas for what that could be here. What would be an interesting... whirlpool? Wonder... Okay. Yes, I've had an idea. Right. I'm going to use this whirlpool model. I'm going to pop that here. Because within the campaign that I'm running at the moment, some of my players have already made it as far as the Underdark, and some of them actually questioned, where does the water come from down here? Where does that actually come from? And since this is already quite a crater-filled area, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a crater that was made somehow in the base of the sea that was big enough that actually it starts to draw things down and into the Underdark through a hole, and the sea draining very slowly down there? What does this mean for the town and the city that are near there? Well, you certainly wouldn't build a town or a city near a whirlpool, but if you were going to already have a city there, and already have a town there, certainly the city would have boats coming in and out. This would be an off-limits area. So all ships would be having to travel around the coast through to the west here. I think that makes sense. The town is probably going to be more directly in the forest, so that's not going to be so influenced. Okay. I've got most of my basic ideas down from the sketch map now. So this is a super rough version of the map that I created. What I'm going to do now is do some extra tweaking and fiddling and see what else I can do to improve things a little bit. So what I've decided to do here, just as a little bit of intrigue, is to combine the idea of the crater and the town together to make a town within a crater. That would offer it quite a lot of defensive advantage. One of the things that Inkarnate can do to speed up the creation of things like forests is it can place many stamps all at once. So we can see that with the trees here. I'm going to just up the radius, lower the density a little bit, as I have many trees that I want to place just sort of all over this area. You will need to go in and manually tidy them up a little bit, but suddenly the map starts to make a lot more sense. Just sort of been fiddling with the river there a little bit, and part of the reason for that is geographical, and part of it is for gameplay reasons. You want certain places to be nice and easy to access, and some places maybe a little more difficult. So in this case, I was originally considering having multiple rivers leading into this central lake, but actually, now that I come to think of it again, I don't want that, because otherwise all my players will need to do is get a boat here in this town and they can sail to anywhere. Whereas I'd like them to have to challenge themselves a little bit. everything kind of how I want it. I think it's a good time now to add some just fine detailing in terms of clips and so on. Moving stuff around, making things just look and feel a little better. I find that the Incarnate clips are a great way to add just a little bit of visual interest on that without doing too much in the way of actually changing how things are going. I think actually from a visual standpoint, I'm quite happy with this. So the next thing to do now, and this will be for the following video, is going to be actually naming these places, coming up with story elements for them, and seeing how I can tie them now into the plot that is gradually developing.
Alright, and that's the end of part 1. Thank you very much for joining me so far. If you've enjoyed this, then by all means leave a like. If you want to see the next episode come out, which should be next week, then hit the subscribe button. You can also now join our new Discord channel, which I'll also leave a link for in the description, so you can check that out as well. Join me next time when I'm going to be talking about the lore for these cities, the background, the naming, maybe coming up with a few NPCs and characters, maybe some adventure ideas. For my players, this is one that you will not want to watch. For the rest of you, I look forward to seeing you then. See you later.